Thanks for being here today. Well, as some of you already know, I'm an iconographer. I have trouble saying it too sometimes. And that means I'm an artist who paints images of Jesus, Mary, the angels, and the saints for private and public veneration. Now, the actual phrase we prefer using is paints an icon. Actually, we prefer not to use paint icon. We use writes an icon. And that's because technically an icon is a language of prayer that teaches the gospel message to all who gaze upon it. The word icon is Greek for image. Grapher means writer. Therefore, an iconographer is someone who writes the language of prayer in images. But in reality, God's really the artist. The iconographer merely mixes the paint and holds the brush for the Lord, who directs everything. In fact, iconographers don't even sign their name to their work because it's not theirs. It's His. He's the divine artist, the creator of all things. And so the original Carlo Acutis and the Pier, Giorgio, Frassati icons of the Lord wrote through me, and these are reproductions here, began with my preparation for a pilgrimage to Italy in October 2023 during the National Eucharistic Revival. And both of these soon-to-be saints are from Italy. They were wealthy and from wealthy and influential families, had a deep personal love for Jesus in the Eucharist, the poor, the sick, the homeless, and the mother of Christ. And together, these holy young men will be raised to the altar by Pope Leo XIV this coming Sunday in Rome. So my talk today is about Carlo Acutis and Pier Giorgio Frassati and the icons God called me to write. So I had been praying for several months about the next icon God wanted me to write. And at first I thought it was St. Augustine, but no, it wasn't. During Mass one morning, I sensed pretty clearly that Carlo Acutis was the Lord's first choice. And I certainly had heard of Carlo, but I had no real devotion to him. But I had recently read that his body was once again displayed for public veneration in Assisi. I also read that his body was incorrupt, but that was incorrect information. It's been confirmed that his mortal remains are going through the natural progression of decay and definitely not incorrupt. With a silicone mask placed over his hands and his face, he's dressed in a pair of blue jeans, a tracksuit jacket, and a pair of Nike sneakers. And he looks like he could sit up and have a conversation with you. I mean, it's truly remarkable. Now, on this pilgrimage, I knew that we would visit Assisi, but I didn't know we'd actually visit the church where his body was enshrined. And so since the location wasn't published in our itinerary, I inquired. And I learned that we would visit there for sure. For me, that was like this holy nudge, that I needed to begin writing that icon right away. My plan was to bring the completed piece to Assisi, have it blessed there, and touch it to Carlo's tomb, if that was even possible. Well, as I always do, I began researching this young blessed from Milan and learned a great deal by reading the book that his mother wrote titled My Son Carlo. I would highly recommend that book. I mean, how wonderful is it that this mother, and her name is Antonio Salzano Acutis, will be present in Rome when her son is declared a saint of the Roman Catholic Church? Can you even imagine what a profound joy this would be for her, knowing that her boy is truly home and interceding for so many across the world? Carlo had been suffering from aches, pains, and bruises the weeks before his death, but he always made light of the pain so others wouldn't worry. He went undiagnosed pretty much until the last minute, and his parents cared for him until they realized something was really wrong. And one night, he told them, I offer my sufferings for the Pope and for the Church so as not to go to purgatory and straight to heaven. A couple days later, Antonia had a dream in which St. Francis of Assisi came to her. He told her that Carlo would become very important in the church. And the next night, while she was praying her rosary, she heard a voice say, Carlo will die. The very next day, Carlo could not get out of bed. So he was taken to the hospital. And as Antonia got out of the car, she was drawn to look at the church directly across the street. And she immediately recalled the relic of Saint Alexander Sauli, spelled S-A-U-L-I. Now, this is a saint I've never heard of before, but he was Carlo's patron saint for the year, as was the custom in Milan. Each year, the young people randomly drew a patron saint, and Carlo drew St. Alexander Sauli, who just happens to be, ready for this, the patron saint of youth. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, right? He was admitted to the hospital, and Carlo told his mother that he would not get out alive. He fell into a coma, and the doctors announced him clinically brain dead on October 11, 2006. And his heart stopped beating the very next day on October 12th. At 15 years old, Carlo died from a cerebral hemorrhage as a result of a rare and excruciating form of leukemia. His feast day is now celebrated on October 12th, the day he died, one day after St. Alexander Sauli's. It's like so interesting. I think it's safe to say that Carlo's patron saint for the year was interceding for him and his family during this incredible time of grieving. What's extraordinary is that Carlo was just an ordinary kid, a teenager, who enjoyed soccer, his friends, and the internet. Self-taught, he developed a website for the Eucharistic miracles and the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. He had a great love for Jesus in the Eucharist, the poor, his Catholic faith. In fact, he helped so many poor and homeless people during his lifetime that they came to his funeral. There were so many of them that came to pay their respects and say thank you to his grieving family. Carlo loved Assisi. He wanted to be buried there. And today you can find his body in full view as entombed at the Church of St. Mary Major in the Chapel of Renunciation. Now that's the exact place where St. Francis stripped his worldly garments and riches for a simpler life in service to Christ and his church. Now, with this in mind, remember, you can't help but recall that St. Francis appeared to Carlo's mother in a dream just before he died. Well, as I began working on the icon, I found several photos of Carlo, many with him wearing a backpack and sunglasses. I chose one very familiar photo to use as the model. Now remember, everything in an icon has meaning because it's meant to teach. And in this icon, the monstrance symbolizes Carlo's love for Jesus and the real presence and all his work to promote Eucharistic adoration. The Wi-Fi symbol, which you probably can't see from where you are, it's pretty faint, but it's there, and recalls Carlo's website and internet work for God's glory. We call those symbols icons, don't we? It's kind of an icon and an icon. And although certainly not traditional in iconography, I thought it appropriate to put Carlo in a pair of sunglasses. If you look closely at the original icon, you can just make out his eyes through the lenses. People often say, you can tell how someone feels just by looking at their eyes. And although I believe Carlo wore sunglasses for practicality, in this icon they symbolize that he was shielding the pain of his leukemia prior to hospitalization and death. He must have been in excruciating pain for some time, but he never complained and bore it all for Jesus. You'll also notice that Carlo is wearing a backpack. Again, not something you'd ordinarily see in an icon. But for me, the backpack symbolizes a heavy cross that Carlo carried, just like Jesus. You might also notice his shirt is red, primarily red. And in iconography, red symbolizes martyrdom, but Carlo wasn't a martyr. In this case, the color red symbolizes the blood that Carlo shed as he hemorrhaged towards his death. He predicted he would die of a brain hemorrhage, and indeed he did. The halo and the monstrance are both 23-karat gold leaf in the original icon, symbolizing holiness and the divine. And I'm pleased to share with you that the original icon was blessed on the altar during Mass near Assisi at the Basilica of St. Mary of the Angels. And thankfully, I did have the opportunity to personally touch the original icon to Blessed Carlo's tomb, which is now part of my private collection, by the way, which is a rarity since most of the icons I do are commissions. The reproductions we have made available here at the shrine are an exact replica of the original, except it now says saint instead of blessed. Didn't know he would be a saint so quickly. And it continues to touch the lives of many through this holy teenager, this soon-to-be saint. So I really don't recall if it was before I left on pilgrimage to Italy or after I returned, but I read an article that blessed Pier Giorgio Michelangelo Frassati, that's a mouthful, would be canonized by Pope Francis in the near future. And that holy nudge hit again. So I began to pray and ask the Lord about writing an icon of blessed Pier Giorgio. And by the way, just like Carlo Acutis, his first name is Carlo and not Carlos, no S. Pier Giorgio's name is never just Pier, it's Pier Giorgio, which is always the way they do it in Italy. And even though someone is dead, we should get their name right, don't you think? Especially a saint. So as I prayed and waited for confirmation from the Lord on this icon, I drew the image of Pier Giorgio on the board. But I wasn't happy with the image, and I walked away out of the studio and let it sit for a while. Sometimes that's a good thing, right? And in the meantime, a friend from Texas that I had met on pilgrimage to Italy phoned me after a lot of texting back and forth about upcoming knee surgeries for her husband and myself. They were coincidentally scheduled for the same day. Well, to make a long story short, she mentioned that they were involved with a local focus group. That's an acronym for the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. Blessed Pier Giorgio is their patron saint. Really? I had to laugh. I mean, what are the chances? I told her that I had a drawing of him on the board in my studio, but was waiting for the Lord's direction to find out who it was for. And before we hung up the phone, she had commissioned the icon. Now, you know when you pray and you ask God what to do, he tells you, right? And a week or so later, she sent me a book titled Finding Frassati by Christine Wohar, which is another book I would highly recommend. And I read it cover to cover, and here's what I learned. Pier Giorgio's mother was a famous artist and greatly influenced his life. His father, whom he had a very rocky relationship with, was a political figure who founded and owned a daily Italian newspaper called La Stampa. His parents had an argumentative and strained marriage, which brought a lack of peace to the home. He was very close to his only sibling, Luciana, who was younger and lived till she was 105. She died in 2007 and was very involved in Pier Giorgio's cause for canonization. In fact, she wrote 2 books that are available in English about her brother. Now, I've not read either of these, but these are the ones that are available in English. A Man of the Beatitudes, and the other one is My Brother Pier Giorgio, His Last Days. Well, this young man attended daily mass, went to confession often, secretly gave away his wealth in the slums, took part in late night, early morning Eucharistic adoration, and was an avid sportsman and mountain climber. At 17 years old, he joined the St. Vincent de Paul Society to help minister to the sick and the needy. And at 21, he became a lay Dominican. He studied mining engineering in college, but was still in school at 24 years old, to his parents' great frustration, but he refused to quit. He was just a regular guy who played pool, couldn't get enough coffee, he's my saint, and had an occasional cigar, and was surrounded by fun-loving friends and was determined to go to heaven one day. Just prior to graduating college, he contracted polio, became bedridden, and suffered an excruciating death at the age of 24 on July 4th, 1925. He was beatified by Pope John Paul II in 1981, and upon examination of his mortal remains, his body was found incorrupt after 54 years. His body in the coffin was recently transported from the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin to the Basilica of St. Maria sopra Minerva in Rome for public veneration during the Jubilee of Youth this past July and August. And that relic is now returned to Turin. Pier Giorgio was just an average guy who loved Jesus. Over billiard games, he would make friendly bets with his buddies. And if they lost, they would have to either go to Mass or Eucharistic adoration or perform some other work of mercy. Don't you love that? It's the best. He loved the Blessed Mother. He always had his rosary in hand, brought flowers from the family garden to her shrine all the time. And his favorite saints were St. Paul and St. Catherine of Siena. So learning all these wonderful things about Pier Giorgio and getting the green light from the Lord, I went back to working on the icon. I redrew the image, told my commissioning friend that she and her husband had to pray with me as I worked. And they agreed. And I explained that in the end, we will have prayed that icon together. It was a beautiful and blessed experience. And in comparison to other icons, this is somewhat of a more simplistic one. So the symbolism of colors becomes even more important to understand what's being conveyed. The color gold symbolizes the divine radiant light of God. We see that in Pier Giorgio's halo, but also in the gold that surrounds the image. The white symbolizes purity and holiness, which is represented in his shirt. This calls attention to the fact that he clothed himself in righteousness and put on the armor of Christ every day to do the Lord's will. Blue symbolizes the heavenly realm and is represented in the background immediately behind the image. Life in the heavenly kingdom was his goal. Brown symbolizes poverty and humility. And even though he was from a wealthy and influential family, he wore the badge of humility as he embraced poverty in service to the poor, the homeless, and the sick. And finally, the quote, Versa il alto, which is translated from Italian to mean to the heights. He was a mountain climber. And so this was something he wrote on the back of the photograph prior to his death. It has become a well-associated phrase with this saint and refers not only to his love for mountain climbing, but also his journey towards eternal life. So in conclusion, what's noteworthy regarding both of these two young men is that they were just ordinary guys. They could be our own sons and grandsons. Carlo loved playing games online, but he limited himself to just 1 hour a week so he could serve the Lord. Pier Giorgio was a sports and outdoor enthusiast, but not until he was certain the Mass and the Eucharist were included in his day. Jesus always came first. They are both incredible role models for anyone today, young or not so young, male or female, but most importantly, the youth in our lives. We need to seek their intercession and pray, and in particular, on this Sunday, September 7th, when Pope Leo declares that they are saints of the Roman Catholic Church. If you'd like to take home a reproduction of the original icons of Pier Giorgio and Carlo Acutis, they are available in the gift shop today for purchase, and I'll be around to answer any questions you might have. And if you do bring one or both home today, for yourself or as a gift, be sure to ask your parish priest to bless them this Sunday, the day they're raised to the altar. We don't often get a chance to have them blessed on the same day they're canonized. Soon-to-be saints Carlo Acutis and Pier Giorgio Frassati, pray and intercede for us and our families. Amen.
Thank you.